The star who trusted the wrong fan, Selena's tragic end. These words hold the weight of a story that has echoed across decades. A story of a rising star whose brilliance captured millions and whose trust in someone close would become a defining moment in music history. Imagine a young woman adored by fans around the world, standing at the very peak of her career, her voice carrying the rhythms of Tejano music into mainstream culture. On the morning of March 31st, 1995, Selena Quintanilla walked into a Days Inn motel room in Corpus Christi, Texas, not knowing that her life was about to change forever. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from. This is the story of a woman who radiated light on stage, who had broken barriers for Latina artists in America, and who trusted someone she believed was her friend and confidant. That trust, placed in the hands of Yolanda Saldivar, would soon reveal how fragile the line can be between admiration and obsession. The hook of this story is not tragedy itself, but the way Selena's life symbolized hope, ambition, and unity for her community. She was more than a singer. She was a daughter, a sister, a wife, and a cultural icon whose songs spoke of love and dreams. In telling her story, we are not merely recounting events. We are reflecting on how someone with everything to live for could be betrayed so close to home. The title speaks of trust, and in the opening beats of this narrative, we will explore what it means when fame creates both opportunity and vulnerability. Selena entered that motel room to tie up loose ends, to retrieve documents, to move forward with her career. She had every reason to believe the meeting was a simple matter. Yet the choices made in those final hours highlight a truth as old as human nature itself. Trust is a gift, and when it is given to the wrong person, it can alter everything. In the next chapters, we will look closely at her rise from childhood stages to Grammy-winning superstardom, the friendship that turned into dependence, and the confrontation that led to her final moments. But here, at the beginning, the focus rests on her brilliance, her generosity, and her vision for the future. Because to understand what happened, we must first understand who Selena was and why she mattered to so many. Selena Quintanilla's story began in Lake Jackson, Texas, where a young girl with an extraordinary voice grew up in a close-knit Mexican-American family that valued hard work, resilience, and music. From an early age, her father, Abraham Quintanilla, recognized her gift and shaped her path by forming the family band Selena y los Dinos, a group that would take them from humble stages to statewide festivals. In the beginning, Selena sang at family restaurants, small community gatherings, and local fairs, places where she learned not just how to perform but how to connect deeply with audiences. Her talent was undeniable. She had the ability to sing in both English and Spanish, bridging cultures with each note and captivating listeners with her charisma. Over the years, as the band moved from town to town, her reputation grew. She began to break into Tejano music, a male-dominated genre where women struggled to gain recognition. Yet Selena's energy, fashion, and personality turned audiences into lifelong fans, and slowly she built a following that crossed cultural lines. By her late teens, she was already recording albums and earning awards, demonstrating that she was more than a regional talent. She was destined for something greater. In 1994, she won a Grammy Award for Best Mexican-American Album, a moment that announced her arrival on the national stage and confirmed what her supporters had always known, that she was the voice of a generation. Her performances filled arenas, her outfits set trends, and her smile made her a role model for young Latinas who saw in her a reflection of their own dreams. Beyond the music, she ventured into business, opening Selena, etc. boutiques that showcased her creativity in fashion design. She was not simply a performer, but an entrepreneur, an innovator, and a beacon of cultural pride. At the same time, she began preparing for her long-awaited crossover into the English-language market with the album Dreaming of You, which promised to take her into mainstream American pop. This period of her life was filled with excitement, milestones, and endless possibilities, making her not only the Queen of Tejano, but also a rising international star. Every sign pointed to a future where Selena would achieve even greater success and influence. And her story at this stage was one of triumph, family unity, and the unstoppable rise of a young woman who had transformed her passion into a legacy in the making. As Selena's career soared to unimaginable heights, she understood the importance of connecting with her fans, the people who had supported her from the very beginning. Out of this bond came the idea of forming an official fan club, a way to give supporters a closer connection to her life and music. In 1991, a woman named Yolanda Saldívaras, who worked as a nurse, approached the Quintanilla family with passion and dedication, offering to run the club. At first, her enthusiasm impressed everyone, and soon she became a central figure within Selena's circle. Yolanda managed not only the fan club, but eventually took charge of Selena's boutiques, Selena, etc., which combined fashion, music, and community. The trust Selena placed in Yolanda was rooted in what she saw as loyalty and unwavering support. Over time, Yolanda was no longer just an employee. She was considered a friend, someone who could be relied upon to handle responsibilities while Selena focused on her demanding schedule of performances, recordings, and business ventures. Selena's personality was known for kindness and generosity, and she often gave people the benefit of the doubt, which made her easy to trust and open to forming close relationships. For her, Yolanda was part of the team, a woman who had proven her commitment through hard work and constant presence. Fans saw Yolanda at events, always by Selena's side, and it reinforced the image that she was deeply trusted. But in the background, this trust came with a cost. Yolanda had access to finances, records, and decisions that few others outside of family could touch. What appeared to be loyalty and friendship was in reality a growing dependence on someone who quietly held more control than anyone realized. At this stage of the story, the relationship between Selena and Yolanda symbolized the powerful but delicate bond between a star and those she relies upon. It showed how fame often requires delegation and how difficult it can be to separate true loyalty from hidden intentions. To Selena, Yolanda was not just a fan club president or boutique manager. She was someone who felt like family, someone whose presence offered reassurance during the chaos of fame. The trust was so deep that questioning it seemed unnecessary. Yet, this bond, formed out of admiration and closeness, would later be revealed as the very connection that led her toward one of the most shocking moments in music history. By early 1995, the smooth path of Selena's career began to collide with troubling discoveries that placed Yolanda Saldívar under suspicion. Employees at the boutiques had begun voicing concerns about missing payments and questionable management practices. Abraham Quintanilla, ever protective of his daughter and her brand, launched his own review of records and found evidence of forged checks and nearly $30,000 in unaccounted funds. It was a turning point that forced the family to remove Yolanda from her positions of authority. Selena, though deeply disappointed, wanted to resolve the matter peacefully and retrieve the financial documents that belonged to her business. On March 31, 1995, she drove to the Days Inn in Corpus Christi, where Yolanda was staying in room 158. What should have been a brief meeting to collect paperwork became a day filled with strange delays. Yolanda claimed she had been assaulted and persuaded Selena to take her to a hospital. Doctors found no evidence of any attack, and the two women returned to the motel, where the conversation turned into an argument about the missing documents. Time was slipping toward midday, and Selena was expected elsewhere, but she lingered, hoping to secure the records and close this chapter. At approximately 11:48 a.m., as she prepared to leave, Yolanda produced a Taurus .38 caliber revolver she had purchased weeks earlier. In a matter of seconds, the confrontation shifted from tense words to irreversible action. Selena turned toward the door, perhaps thinking the conflict would end with her departure, but a single shot rang out. The bullet struck her in the lower right shoulder, severing a major artery. The wound caused massive blood loss almost immediately, and yet her determination carried her forward. Despite the pain and the shock, she ran nearly 400 feet to the motel lobby, leaving a trail that testified to both her strength and her will to survive. Witnesses described her collapse and her last desperate words identifying Yolanda as the shooter and pointing authorities to room 158. Within minutes, paramedics arrived and rushed her to Corpus Christi Memorial Hospital. Doctors fought to save her, but the injury had taken too much. By 1:05 p.m., the news that no one wanted to hear was confirmed. Selena, only 23 years old, was gone, and the story that began with trust and loyalty had reached its devastating climax. The shooting at the Days Inn was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a shocking twist that revealed just how fragile the bond of trust could be. Moments after firing the shot that struck Selena, Yolanda Saldivar ran to her pickup truck in the motel parking lot, clutching the same revolver that had altered music history forever. As Selena collapsed in the lobby, after naming her assailant, law enforcement swarmed the scene and quickly traced the crime back to room 158. What unfolded next was a tense, 9.5-hour standoff between Yolanda and negotiators from both the local police and the FBI. She held the gun to her own head, threatening to end her life, while officers tried to reason with her through a vehicle loudspeaker and direct conversation. The area was sealed off, reporters gathered outside, and the community anxiously waited for resolution. For many fans, the initial shock deepened when the identity of the shooter became public knowledge. This was not a random act of violence. It was not a faceless stalker. It was the woman who had been entrusted to manage Selena's fan club and boutiques, someone who had attended family gatherings, posed for photographs, and presented herself as loyal. That betrayal was the cruelest twist. The trust that Selena had offered so openly had been shattered in the most devastating way possible. Crowds began to assemble at hospitals and outside news stations, holding signs, singing her songs, and crying together as updates trickled out. Television networks interrupted regular programming to report on the standoff, and by evening, Yolanda finally surrendered, stepping out of her truck with her hands raised. She was taken into custody without further harm, but the damage had already been done. The public reeled at the reality that an admired superstar was gone, and that the person responsible had been within her closest professional circle. This revelation amplified the heartbreak, for it was easier to imagine a star lost to an accident than to acknowledge the pain of betrayal by someone trusted. The twist in Selena's story was not only the violence itself, but the lesson it carried about vulnerability in the spotlight. It showed how success and fame can sometimes invite not just admiration, but dangerous dependence. In this moment, the tragedy was magnified because the person who claimed to love her most as a fan had taken her away, leaving behind unanswered questions and a wound that would remain in the hearts of her family and millions of admirers. When the dust of that tragic day finally settled, the focus shifted from shock and grief to the long pursuit of justice. Authorities quickly gathered the evidence, from Selena's last words that identified Yolanda Saldivar as the shooter to the firearm recovered at the scene. The investigation moved swiftly, for the crime had unfolded in full view of witnesses and left little room for doubt. Still, the law required a formal process, and the eyes of the world turned toward the courtroom where the fate of the woman who had betrayed Selena would be decided. In October 1995, the trial began in Houston, relocated from Corpus Christi to ensure an impartial jury after months of intense media coverage. The prosecution presented the chain of events with clarity, showing how Saldivar had purchased the revolver weeks before the confrontation, how she had stalled meetings with fabricated claims, and how the shot that ended Selena's life was not a random outburst, but the culmination of a deep breach of trust. Witnesses included motel staff, medical experts, and members of the Quintanilla family who gave voice to the pain of losing a daughter and sister. The defense tried to portray Saldivar as emotionally unstable, suggesting the shooting had been accidental, but the jury was not swayed. After weeks of testimony and days of deliberation, the verdict was read on October 23, 1995. Yolanda Saldivar was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. For Selena's family and fans, it was a measure of justice, though nothing could restore the life that had been taken. The case became one of the most watched trials in Texas history, with headlines across the United States and beyond marking its conclusion. Decades later, the parole clock finally began to move, and in March 2025, Saldivar's case was reviewed by the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles. The request was denied, citing the nature of the crime and ongoing public safety concerns, with the next review set for 2030. This resolution brought a sense of closure in legal terms, but the emotional scars remained. The courtroom sketches, the newspaper headlines, and the quiet dignity of Selena's family in their pursuit of justice all became part of the larger narrative, reminding the world that accountability had been delivered. Yet, the absence of Selena could never be erased. The legacy of Selena Quintanilla did not end on March 31st, 1995. In many ways, it began anew, as the world united in grief and remembrance for the young woman who had given so much in such a short life. Fans poured into the streets of Corpus Christi and cities across the United States and Mexico, holding vigils, singing her songs, and creating makeshift memorials adorned with flowers and photographs. Television networks interrupted programming to share the heartbreaking news, and the scale of the response was compared to the passing of figures like John Lennon, Kurt Cobain, and even President John F. Kennedy. Soon after, April 16th was officially declared Selena Day in Texas, a recognition of her cultural impact and her role in breaking barriers for Latina artists. Her family worked to preserve her legacy by continuing to share her music and her story with the world. Just months after her passing, her English-language crossover album Dreaming of You was released in July 1995. It debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200, making Selena the first Hispanic woman to achieve such a milestone. The record not only cemented her place in music history, but also proved the vast potential she had as an international star. Years later, her story was immortalized in the 1997 biopic Selena, starring Jennifer Lopez in a breakthrough role, a film that introduced her life and music to an even wider audience. In 2020, the Netflix series Selena the Series revisited her journey, ensuring that new generations could discover her impact. Beyond music and film, her presence continues in physical memorials such as the Mirador de la Flor statue in Corpus Christi and the Selena Museum, where fans gather to celebrate her life. Her boutiques, fashion, and iconic style remain part of her influence, inspiring countless artists and admirers. For millions of people, Selena became more than a performer. She symbolized hope, perseverance, and the ability to rise above barriers. She represented the dream that cultural identity could be embraced rather than hidden, and that love and passion could reach across boundaries of language and geography. Even in death, her voice continues to resonate, carried by fans who still dance to her songs and feel the warmth of her presence. The tragedy of her final day will always be remembered, but it is her music, her kindness, and her unshakable spirit that define her story. Selena's legacy is not one of loss alone, but of inspiration that endures across generations.